Irma has blown away DACA, and yet there's DACA news to be had. Listen to it over and over right here on Emil Amok's Takeout. And hello, dear listener, wherever you may be. Hey, I'm realistic. Hey, welcome to what I call Emil Amok's Takeout. We serve it, you take it out. Forms the acronym EAT, E-A-T, and it is time to eat. My takes on all things about race, society, politics, and diversity, and everything those things touch in our culture and society with respect to Asian Americans. And of course, you don't have to be Asian American to lend us your ears. It's your minds we want. And we're all in the same boat anyway, huh? Just remember that, huh? I'm Emil Guillermo, your host, and you might say, why Amok? Well, the short story is that for nearly 15 years, my Emil Amok column was a staple of AsianWeek, what was once the leading Asian American weekly in English in America. It was a rag that showed up on your doorstep in San Francisco every week. It sometimes was on the news racks. Amok was the name of my compilation of essays, and Amok is on my driver's license, not indicative of my mental state. Hey, and it's also the name of my solo show, a one-man theatrical, shall we call it an extravaganza? It's actually kind of thin and spare. It's a one-man solo show coming for Filipino American History Month just in time in October. Stay tuned for an announcement, and we'll tell you how to get tickets and where to go. And also in November, we're going to the Charm City Fringe Festival, one of the last fringe festivals because it gets too cold otherwise. But it's coming to Baltimore in November. I'll have details coming soon. And of course, it all started with a humble little column, Emil Amok, home based on the website now of the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund blog. That's at ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. Check it out. And if you like what you see and hear, don't forget ALDEF is a 501c3, a legit 501c3. Go to the donate button. It's tax deductible. Really. You can also read me in some other publications too, Inquirer.net, the Philippine Inquirer, diverseeducation.com, also in the archives at sfgate.com. Now, on this episode, my dear friend Irma Herrera, who is a solo performer, and she's opening at the San Francisco Fringe Festival this weekend, she always reminds me it's Irma. Irma, not Irma. Irma. Like you're getting an earful. And certainly it's not as Trump said. I understand he said Irma, which is kind of a New Yorkie way to say Irma. But in any event, I hope you're dry wherever you are. Well, if you're outside of Florida, you probably are dry. But if you're in Florida or somewhere in the path of Irma, because the storm has expanded to the west coast of Florida and up through Georgia. I've been talking to some Filipino Americans and Asian Americans on the Miami side of Florida, on that Atlantic coast, and they all started leaving around Thursday. Now it seems like the west coast will be hardest hit. They're starting to evacuate in Tampa as I speak. And it just keeps marching. Now, I have a daughter who lives in Georgia, and she's being warned about winds estimated between 60 and 80 miles per hour, and that's a conservative guess. Now, it's lighter perhaps than what's expected in Florida, but a constant 60 to 80 degrees miles per hour, well, that's a pounding that is still capable of some heavy, heavy damage. And to think that we just dealt with Harvey, I mean, all you who suffered from Harvey, and if you listened to the last podcast or went to our last blog post at aldef.org/blog, you can hear and read some of their voices. But my heart still goes out to you out there in South Texas. And at about this time with Harvey and now with Irma, climate deniers are getting their rebuttal in real time. I think it just points to one thing. It's time, Dr. David Dow there helping me out. It's time to get smart about the climate. I mean, these things just don't happen. They happen as a result of what we do to the earth. Of course, man-made problems hit us all the time. We're used to them. We saw it at the beginning of the week. Donald Trump is a man-made problem. And this week, DACA's rescission is a classic case. You know, when Trump pretty much threw the dreamers under the bus, I mean, it thrusts the lives of 800,000 dreamers into turmoil when DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, was ended with that 6 months, what is it, a kind of 6 months limbo period for Congress to take action? Well, you can see what I think of Trump's decision on the blog at aldef.org. I wrote a bit about it when it broke, and you can see the pattern. There was Charlottesville and all that happened there with the way Trump postured and, you know, the rhetoric that came out during that event. There was a pardoning of Arpaio, the Sheriff Joe, the man who would rather go to jail than stop racially profiling. Now there's DACA, the rescission of DACA. It's Trump playing white identity politics to his base of white voters. I mean, as a nation becomes a nation of minorities, when people of color become the new majority, here's Trump standing by the white minority, the white voters, to the exclusion of Latinos, Asian Americans, African Americans. I mean, DACA is a blow to mostly Latinos, but there are many Asians who are under DACA, even some whites, some African Americans. You know, I was trying to look for some real numbers. They only have estimates now, but this is a calculation by Trump. 6 months for Congress to find a solution. So what? So that he can come back and maybe change his mind? In the meantime, he plays the white political identity game. You see, if you really try to understand what's behind this, because, you know, Trump loves the dreamers, right? He always says, I love the dreamers, it's hard, but I'm not going to help you right now, right? That's what he's saying. Trump's real problem is that DACA was an Obama plan, and Trump is the anti-Obama. I mean, just remember the birther movement that was spawned by Trump that he took really down to the wire. He wouldn't give up. And then when he said, he was wrong, it wasn't really a true denunciation. Once again, it's just his pattern. He never denounces anything that's wrong. He's got to play it his way. He's always right. That's the master negotiator, right? He's always right. So if you recall how the birther movement went under Trump, I think DACA is doomed, right, for now. But in 6 months, if the voices are loud and if Trump sees how unpopular his decisions are, here's his out. He simply brings it back, rebranded, like everything else he touches, hotels, steaks, water, you name it, clothing, any kind of product. That's all it is to Trump. He rebrands it with his own executive order. He stamps it Trump's action on deferred action, or Trump's action on childhood arrivals, right? TACA, TACA, not DACA, TACA. Yeah, Trump's action on childhood arrivals. And there it goes. He obliterates Obama from our political memories, and he gets to play for the Latino vote. It's just a beautiful world, as Donald Trump would say. A beautiful, beautiful world. Like something like no one's ever seen before. Oh, no one. How about something the likes of which the world has never seen before? TACA instead of DACA. Trump's action on childhood arrivals That's my prediction. It's the only megalomaniacal, self-aggrandizing way out for Herr Donald, Herr Orange, Mr. Trump. And that way he can say, yeah, I love the DACA kids. I love the DACA kids all along. I let Congress decide, and when they didn't, hey, look, I love the DACA kids. I hate Obama still. I just need to rebrand the darn thing. It's the Hurricane Trump model of politics. Okay, but the real actual hurricane actually obliterated Hurricane Trump and obliterated some real coverage, like the latest lawsuit, the third, I believe now, against the federal government that will try to force the government to keep DACA alive. UC, the University of California, which is it's the finest public institution in the land. I'm not just, that's established, right? And they also have some 4,000 undocumented students and employees who are faculty members, and they had to do something about DACA, so they stepped up. UC President Janet Napolitano announced on Friday that it was suing the Department of Homeland Security, the very agency that she led and that she helped, she was the head of when DACA was introduced. She spoke on Friday about what the suit does. Here's UC President Janet Napolitano at her media conference.
The suit makes three fundamental claims about the recent actions to rescind DACA. A, that it's not supported by reasoned decision-making. B, it did not follow the necessary procedures for a decision of this nature and magnitude. Both of those first two claims are based under the Administrative Procedures Act. And then third, that the decision violates the due process rights of the university and its DACA students and staff under the United States Constitution. Federal law requires that an agency needs to establish its decision was supported by reasoned decision-making to be lawful. I think that the administration's approach in rescinding DACA was the opposite of reasoned decision-making, and thus is unlawful. It did not assess the cost of rescinding DACA to the hundreds of thousands of Dreamers or to the schools and communities in which they live, study, and work. It failed to consider the interests of the Dreamers. It failed to justify why it dramatically shifted position on the lawfulness of DACA only a few short years after the Office of Legal Counsel at the Department of Justice determined that DACA was lawful. And even more troublingly, the only legal theory offered by the administration is wrong. In addition, the administration failed to comply with mandatory procedures for notice and comment that federal law requires for a decision of this type and magnitude to allow for affected parties, such as the DACA recipients themselves and institutions like the university that are deeply affected by the decision, to provide comment and to inform a correct decision. And finally, the action tramples on the due process rights of the university and its students, and those rights cannot be taken away by executive fiat. At the University of California, we see the exceptional contributions that young Dreamers make every day. Most are first in their families to attend college and are working hard to further their educations. Some are pursuing PhDs and are pursuing ambitious humanitarian goals. They really represent the spirit of the American dream. And by its action, the administration has dashed those dreams. We hope by this lawsuit to restore those dreams and to restore DACA to its rightful place. We also hope, by the way, and will be advocating for Congress to act as well. So, in effect, we are pursuing both judicial remedy and legislative remedy to this situation. But this decision we obviously disagree with as inconsistent with the law, as inconsistent with good immigration policy, and as inconsistent with our values as a nation.
Now, President Napolitano was asked about that Office of Legal Counsel memo, which was written in 2014, and how significant that's going to be. And apparently, that's kind of the linchpin. You know, that's important, and it's important that this was not an executive order in the sense of other executive orders. It was issued out of the Department of Homeland Security, which makes it subject to a lot of other rules and regulations that the Trump administration, maybe because of its lack of experience, just failed to realize. Here's some other questions that came out in the media call. One of which, it begins with the question about that Office of Legal Counsel memo. And it also talks about whether or not she, the UC President Napolitano, considered recusing herself, because after all, she was the head of the Department of Homeland Security. Here's Janet Napolitano.
You mentioned the OLC memo. I'm curious whether your lawyers think it could be a significant factor that DOJ apparently still has not rescinded the 2014 memo on DACA, 2014 as I understand it, and how much that contributes to the notion that this wasn't a reasoned decision.
Well, I think it contributes quite a bit, because under the Administrative Procedures Act, when you take an action such as this, it has to be based on a correct interpretation of the law. And if it's not based on a correct interpretation of the law, the court should deeply review the administrative act that was undertaken and reverse it. So the fact that the OLC memo is still out there is a significant fact.
Can you define in terms of time and deadlines what will suing the Trump administration represent for DACA beneficiaries? Will this extend some of the deadlines that they have at this point?
It won't extend the deadlines right now until the court acts. And so it is important for dreamers whose DACA registrations would expire between now and March the 5th to go ahead and apply for renewal between now and October 5th, because even under the current guidance being issued by the department, we would anticipate those renewals to be granted. But we do intend to press the court to move expeditiously.
Hi there. I wonder if you feel like there's any conflict of interest here, being named as one of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit, and of course having implemented DACA under the Obama administration. Was there any consideration as to whether you should recuse yourself?
No, in fact, there's absolutely no conflict. We designed DACA when I was secretary. It went through a careful legal analysis, both at the department and at the Department of Justice. No court has ever held that DACA was illegal, and I believe it to be a legal exercise of prosecutorial discretion to this day. So there's no conflict, and there was no thought of recusal.
That's Janet Napolitano, the president of the University of California, at the media call talking about the suit filed by the university. And, all these suits, it may not bring about the change we want to see in time. There are deadlines, and as you heard the president of UC say, that you better adhere to the deadlines. That means you've got to meet that October deadline to to renew. If you fall in time, let's see, March is the drop dead deadline, the outer deadline, but to renew, you've got to get your renewal in by October. So the New America Media Call, which was also held this week, had an attorney for the Immigrant Legal Resource Center. She spelled out what the deadlines mean and what you need to follow right now.
Once again, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA program, was established by President Obama in 2012 to offer a 2-year renewable protection from deportation and a work permit to a certain class of young immigrants who came to the United States before the age of 16, complied with certain educational requirements, and passed background checks. Since that time, as was mentioned, over 780,000 folks have registered with the DACA program. Many have had DACA for a 2-year period. Many have renewed their DACA status, the 2-year period, for a second or even a third 2-year period. So over the last 5 years, we've seen a huge number of people register for the program and renew the benefits they receive under the program. We heard during the presidential campaign candidate Trump say he wanted to end the program. When President Trump took office at the beginning of this year, we heard a slight change in his rhetoric, saying he wanted to find a solution for dreamers and to deal with this issue with heart. This week, on Tuesday, September 5th, the Trump administration announced that the DACA program would be ended and would be phased out. And that means that cases would be allowed to kind of naturally expire over the next 2 years. So the program will end, but will be phased out slowly. So what does all of this mean for people who currently hold DACA or who are interested in applying? Well, first of all, it means if you currently have an approved DACA case and an approved work permit, that DACA protection and your work permit are valid until they expire. So cases are not being revoked or terminated immediately. They're being allowed to naturally expire. It also means, though, that the Immigration Service will no longer accept new applications for the DACA program. So it's kind of a closed universe of people who are able to now enroll in the program. Anyone who had an initial application on file on September 5th, the date of the announcement, those cases will be processed normally. But no new applications will be accepted as of yesterday, September 6th. In terms of people who currently hold DACA, if someone's DACA case will expire in the next 6 months, and 6 months is defined as between September 5th, the date of the announcement, and March 5th, 2018, those people are allowed to renew their DACA. However, those applications must be received by the Immigration Service by the deadline of October 5th. So that is the only category of people who are allowed to renew their DACA status, those whose cases will expire in the next 6 months. Anyone whose DACA case will expire after that window, meaning as of March 6th or later, are no longer eligible to renew their DACA status. So this really represents a major shift since so many people have been enrolled in the program and renewed their registration in the program over the last 5 years. And I think some of our other speakers will speak to, the real practical impact that has on different members of the immigrant community. One of the big messages we want to get out to the immigrant community at this time is to reassure people if you currently have DACA, an unexpired grant of DACA, you continue to be protected by DACA and you're able to work legally with your work permit until it expires. So there's no immediate effect if you currently have DACA. You're still protected and able to work under your current work permit until it expires. We also want to remind people if their DACA case will expire in the next 6 months to apply to renew their DACA by the deadline of October 5th. That's a very short window for people to find legal assistance to gather the funds necessary to apply. The application costs $495, but that is the deadline for applying for renewal if your DACA will expire in the next 6 months. And a general recommendation for everyone is to get a legal consultation to understand your legal options. So it could be that someone who has DACA is also eligible for another immigration benefit, and they don't know it, or maybe they do know it and they've been kind of putting off starting the application process because they've had DACA. So this is a really important moment for people to go and do a consultation with a quality legal service provider to understand their options. But we really want to make sure people are careful about fraudulent service providers at this time. There's so much confusion and fear in the community. We really don't want people to fall prey to fraudulent service providers. A great resource for finding a legal service provider in your area is through Ian, or the website is immigrationadvocates.org. And under their nonprofit tab, they actually have a legal directory, a national legal directory, and you can click on a state or enter a zip code and find quality legal service providers in your area. So we really want to make sure people are getting assistance if they're eligible to renew, but that everyone has an individual consultation to understand their legal options at this time.
So there are your deadlines. Allison Davenport with the Immigrant Legal Resource Center on this New America Media Call. You should also seek legal counsel on your own. Of course, you're always free to call ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund blog. But that was from the New America Media Call that was held this week. There were also some other interesting people on that call. There was Tom Wong, a professor at UC San Diego, who did a survey on DACA recipients, the most recent one that exists. He gave the highlights of what DACA recipients represent. I mean, when you talk about the 800,000, from this representative sampling, what can you say about DACA recipients in general? Here's Professor Wong.
So when we think about the data, we can think about the impact that DACA has had on recipients. We can break it up into the impact on employment, the impact on earnings, the broader impact on the economy, and then the impact on education. So when it comes to impact on employment, we see that 91% of DACA recipients are currently employed. We know that DACA recipients are now in their mid-20s and early 30s. So if we focus on the population that's 25 and older, this employment rate jumps to 93%. Now, after receiving DACA, 69% of respondents reported moving to a job with better pay. 54% reported moving to a job that better fits their education and training. 54% also reported that they moved to a job that better fits their long-term career goals. And 56% reported moving to a job with better working conditions. We also see that 5% of DACA recipients have started their own businesses after receiving DACA. If we focus again on the DACA population that's 25 years and older, we see that 8% have started their own businesses. Now, this is higher than the rate of business starts for the American public as a whole, which means that DACA is helping to unlock the economic potential of DACA recipients. When we think about DACA's impact on earnings, what the data show are that wages have increased by 69% since receiving DACA. Among respondents 25 years and older, this percentage is 84%. For the first time, we were able to report the average annual earnings for DACA recipients. This is $36,232. For those 25 years and older, it's $41,621. Now, we know that with more money comes more spending. And we also see that 16% of DACA recipients have purchased their first home since receiving DACA, and If we focus on the population 25 years and older, this percentage increases to 24%. In other words, nearly 1/4 of DACA recipients 25 years and older have purchased their first homes since receiving DACA. We also see that 65% of DACA recipients have purchased their first cars after receiving DACA. So when it comes to DACA's impact on the broader economy, what we're seeing is that as DACA recipients are earning more in income, that translates into higher tax revenues for the federal government as well as for states. And as DACA recipients are increasing their economic footprint through the purchase of homes and cars, we see that that adds to the economy as well in the form of sales taxes and property taxes. We also see that DACA recipients and their talents are being recognized by some of the top companies, not just in the country, but in the world. So in looking at the occupation and where DACA recipients were employed, we see that 72% of the top 25 Fortune 500 companies, so this is 18 out of the top 25, including Apple, Amazon, JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, and others, employ DACA recipients. So lastly, when it comes to DACA's impact on education, we see that 45% of DACA recipients are currently in school. Among those who are currently in school, 72% are pursuing a bachelor's degree or higher. So the majors and specializations range from the humanities and social sciences to the natural sciences. So we see accounting, biochemistry, business administration, chemical engineering, civil engineering, computer science, and we're just at the C's when it comes to the majors and specializations that DACA recipients are pursuing while in school. For those who are currently out of school, for those 25 years and older, 36% have a bachelor's degree or higher. This is not only higher than the native-born population as a whole, but it's also higher than the naturalized citizen population, which is the most educated subset of American society. And of those who are in school, 94% said that because of DACA, they pursued educational opportunities that they previously could not. Now, there's one last point that I think is worth sharing, which is that nearly 3/4 of DACA recipients have either a U.S. citizen, sibling, spouse, or child. What we see in the data is that 1/4 of DACA recipients has a U.S. citizen child, and 17% has a U.S. citizen spouse. So when I think about the data and what it all points to, it makes clear that DACA works, that DACA not only improves the lives of individual recipients and their families, but positively affects the American economy and society more generally. We also see that DACA recipients are American in every sense of the word, but for a piece of paper. In the data, we see that the average age at entry to the United States is 6.5 years old. This means that DACA recipients, on average, arrived in the country pretty much around kindergarten or first grade. And now, as they're hitting their stride in life, as they hit their mid-20s and early 30s, the decision to end DACA is literally pulling the rug out from under DACA recipients. And given the mounting empirical evidence that suggests DACA works, the administration's decision to end DACA doesn't reflect good policy, but, in my view, political expediency.
Now, also on the call, this New America Media call, was Luis Quiroz, who's a student at San Francisco State, who came to America when he was just 6 months old, and he had an interesting story about this. Is the only country he ever knew. He talked about a situation where, well, he had a family situation where a family member was murdered and he wasn't able to go back, and it was a sad story. But when I got a chance to ask him a question, I asked him if all this with DACA and the Trump administration, if it's hurt or helped him in his ability to trust the government. Has it destroyed the credibility of the U.S. government? Here's what, and this is a guy who represents the dreamers who are the best that America has, right? These are the people who came here through no fault of their own. They're young kids. This is their country. They voluntarily gave up information. They said, this is where we want to be. We are American. Here's my information. They trusted the government. And now the government has come back and done this to them. And this is what Luis Quiroz said when I asked him, how does it affect your ability to trust the U.S. government?
I'm presuming that some people do not apply, not necessarily because of resources available, but maybe because of mistrust in government and mistrust in what the government would do with the information. Luis, you came forward. Has this provided, and I told you so moment, for people who you know who did not apply? And if it has it made you lose trust in government? Has it made you distrust what the government will do from here on? And how does it make you feel about if that government will do the right thing ultimately?
Again, this is Luis. Thank you for the question. It actually took me personally 2 years to apply. So DACA was announced in 2012 as a policy, an executive order, and I did not apply until 2014 under the advising of my family members to not disclose my information, to not trust, just like you're saying. But, I reached a certain point where I had no other options. If I wanted to get a better paying job, I kind of had to do what I had to do, and I took that risk. Granted, now that USCIS has my information, what can they do with it is kind of like a big question for my community. We're understanding that they're not supposed to use it unless there's an active investigation, and that they're not supposed to actively track us down. So, of course, there's still uncertainty. We can never know what exactly is going to happen. I have a little nephew that just became eligible for DACA a couple years ago, and he did not apply in time, unfortunately. And so now how is this going to affect him? We really don't know. He's not eligible for a work authorization, so he will have to make ends meet elsewhere or somewhere else. But I think the true effects kind of tie back down to that looming uncertainty that we have lived with before DACA, and now that DACA has been rescinded, we still have to kind of carry on and live through. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, sort of. But do you trust the government more now or less after seeing what has happened here?
I think that's such a tricky question to kind of tackle. Of course, you want to trust government. It's me personally. I want to believe in government. I want to believe that it's here for what it says it's here for, which is to defend and kind of serve its people, offer opportunities, but it's hard to trust. It is hard to trust the government. I want to believe in what it stands for, but I can't wholeheartedly say that I do. Yeah.
Luis Quiroz, an honest answer. The only question I was able to get in there during that New American Media call, but he's a DACA recipient from Mexico, now attending school at San Francisco State University, talking about the damaged trust inflicted by the capricious actions of the Trump administration. Really, you got to ask these questions. Did the president consider his constitutional rights to due process, his rights under the Equal Protection Clause? Did the president even consider the Administrative Procedure Act, which allows for notice and comment for any major change in law? Because if he didn't, well, then it was totally capricious, totally an executive whim. And what about the Office of Legal Counsel's memo within the Justice Department that declared DACA legal? Remember, no court has said that DACA is illegal. And the memo within the Justice Department said DACA is legal. And now the political winds blow the other way and say DACA is illegal and we got to respect the rule of law. This is what's going to be answered by these lawsuits as they challenge the Trump administration. The Trump administration, which pardoned Joe Arpaio and is now throwing the DACA recipients out in 6 months. This is a man-made disaster created by Trump. The natural disaster news may have caused you to miss some of this, but now come the lawsuits by UC, the state's attorneys general. There are 16 states. Oddly enough, California isn't one of them. And there's one filed on behalf of students. And they're all trying to make it right. Let's hope they prevail. All right? In the meantime, if you need to catch the deadline information, just replay, use the fast forward, listen to it over and over again. In the meantime, we'll watch for Irma and hope those in Florida and the Southeast hang on and stay safe. I mean, I'm praying for my daughter who could get hit hard. I mean, Irma may be just a tropical storm by the time it hits Georgia, but it's still 60, 85 mile per hour winds, and that's going to inconvenience a lot of lives, endanger a lot of lives. Let's hope everyone stays safe. And that's our program. Hey, we're on iTunes. Yeah, really. Please subscribe, rate, and review. I mean, that's how you find us on iTunes. Emil Amok's, 2 words. Takeout, 3 words. EAT, Emil Amok's Takeout. Also, if you put down Emil Guillermo, my real name, you'll find it there. Tell your friends about the show. Share a link. You can contact me on Twitter at Emil Amok. That's EMILAMOK. Or go to the ALDEF blog at www.aldef.org/blog and give us your feedback, please. If you choose, you can go to www.amok.com and leave a message on SpeakPipe. You don't need a phone. And if you're so moved, check out the blog, support the program. Go to aaldef.org/blog. Click on the donate button. ALDEF is a 501c3. And that's it. Once again, thank you, all of you, for listening to Emil Amok's Takeout. Join us again next time. Maybe sooner than later. I'm Emil Guillermo.